So, what's the deal with Drew? I'm sure this is something that you've been wondering since watching episode 11. No? Just me? I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not just me. Now, I'd be lying if I said that I was surprised that Drew and Jake broke up, because I wasn't that surprised. I was really hoping that that wouldn't happen, but it really seemed the direction that the show was going. What really surprised me was what Drew said specifically. So yeah, today I'm going to be analyzing like every word in Drew's argument against Jake that led to them breaking up. But before I do that, I want to quickly look into Drew's character, and specifically Drew's relationship with Jake, and all the events leading up to this argument. Honestly, Drew seems a lot like the stereotypical rich kid. He has a lot of money, he has a girlfriend who happens to be using him for his money. But even though it feels really stereotypical to me personally, there's a lot there to unpack. Drew's parents are rich and are probably pretty busy with other stuff often. They probably give him expensive gifts as a way to kind of make up for this in a way. I know this is something that happens a lot with rich parents and their children. I'm not going to go and talk about Drew's relationship with Zoe in this video because this is about Jake, but I get the feeling that the reason that he buys Zoe a lot of things is he thinks that that'll win her love in a way, which is exactly why he's such a good target for her. But Zoe isn't the only person that he gives expensive gifts to. Looking at the flashback in episode 9, he gave Jake a gacha switch even though they really had just met recently, and it kind of sounded like he gave one to Henry and Liam too, though I'm not exactly sure. Whatever the case is, it feels like Drew is really desperate for attention because that's not something that he got at home as a kid, and he probably still doesn't even as a teenager. And he thinks that if he gives people gifts that they will be his friend, or whatever. He really just seems desperate for approval, honestly. And this need for attention also explains why he bullies the music club. According to stompoutbullying.org, a common reason that a kid is a bully is because they lack attention from a parent at home and lash out at others for attention. This could include neglected children, children of divorced parents, or children with parents under the regular influence of drugs or alcohol. Really, I just get the feeling that Drew wants attention and he doesn't really know how to get it properly. I also get the feeling from his relationship with Jake that Drew also may have attachment issues. According to this article on WikiHow, if your parents weren't emotionally available or your needs weren't met as a child, you might get attached easily because you're afraid of being abandoned. People with anxious attachment styles crave intimacy but worry others don't want to be with them. Drew's main complaint for Jake is that he feels like he just doesn't get enough time with him anymore, and he feels like he's losing him. Drew is constantly trying to get reassurance from Jake that he's going to leave the music club, that this is just for Daisy, that they're his real friends. He keeps repeating these same questions over and over, and it puts Jake in a really difficult situation because it makes it really difficult for Jake to tell the truth. Honestly, this feels really manipulative, but I don't think he was being manipulative on purpose. He was just afraid of losing Jake, and it made him become clingy and possessive because he was just really attached to him. The whole situation made him really anxious, which made it very difficult for him to listen to reason. Before I go on, I need to acknowledge the elephant in the room, and that's Drake. There's definitely an argument to be made that Drew is in love with Jake, although I feel like really anyone in the school, there's an argument to be made that they're in love with Jake. I'm not going to push aside that possibility, as it's obvious that Rosie is aware of the ship. I just want to point out that it really doesn't matter. Whether or not he's in love with him, he can still be attached to him, and he can still be possessive, and he can still be clingy, and he can still fear losing him to Haley. Honestly, I don't really get the feeling that Drew sees Haley as like a romantic rival, because even though he's annoyed at the mention of Daisy in episode 9, it's not until Jake mentions Haley that he gets really emotional. I don't think Drew had anything personally against Haley before Jake joined the music club, which is completely different in the case of Haley, who had something very personal against Drew since he bullied her so much. In episode 8, Drew comes into the music room with Liam and Henry, and just to see Jake, and Haley gets really upset at him just for being in the room. If he didn't feel like it before, it definitely started at this point, that he felt like Haley was trying to take Jake away from him, Which, honestly, she was. She forced Jake into this choice between herself and Drew, which was honestly really unfair. I can understand where she's coming from, though, with the background that Drew has. Jake is so convinced that if he told Drew the truth, that Drew wouldn't support him, but we don't know if that's the case or not, because the only way that he could tell him was to admit that he was lying. I don't think that Drew would have been angry at Jake for liking music. I think he would just feel betrayed that he hadn't known before. So while it does feel like Haley is being unfair saying Drew wouldn't support his passion and she would, I can see where she's coming from. Although I don't think that this is the problem that Drew has with Jake's confession about liking music. And must I point out, Jake was also being manipulating, just like literally every character in the show. He kept telling Drew that he was their real friend, and he kept telling the music club that he was their real friend. Because in the truth, he really just loved both of them and didn't want to lose either of them. But it caught him in this really bad place where both Haley and Drew thought that he was on their side. So while it felt like Haley was trying to force Jake into a decision that he really shouldn't have to make, out of everyone, I think she was the least manipulative, but I can definitely see why Drew was really upset with her and put all the blame on her. Plus, must I point out, Drew was not the first person to say that Haley was manipulative. Leah says it in episode 9, and Drew just kind of hops on board.
I don't think Haley thinks that. She wouldn't stop rubbing the whole duet thing in my face. The moment you auditioned, she knew she could use you. That's all she cares about.
I'm sure he would happily agree to any situation where Jake would be better off leaving Haley and things would go back to the way that they were before. But I've talked enough about that. I think it's time that we actually look at what Drew said in episode 11.
You've got Jake wrapped around your little finger, embarrassing himself just as you wanted. Are you happy with yourself?
It starts off with Drew accusing Haley of being manipulative, which is to be expected. It seems like he truly believes that this is the case, either because he really hopes it's the case, or because he just thinks that it's true. Haley and Leah used to be friends, so I can definitely see why Drew would think Leah's a reliable source for that kind of information. Still, I get the feeling that Drew knows a lot more than he lets on and is just in denial and hoping that it's not true.
Yeah, quite some speech, Jake. Blabbering about the competition again. That's all you seem to care about these days.
You still don't get it, Drew. The club is what I care about. My friends!
And what am I then? Because ever since you joined them, it's as if we never were. You barely have time for us anymore. You practically live in that stinking club room.
That sentence, you barely have time for us anymore. I don't know why, but to me that really sounds like something that a kid would say to their parent. He seems to have a hard time understanding why Jake has to go and practice for the band competition, in the same way he may have had a hard time understanding why his parents were always busy when he was a kid. Maybe I'm reading too far into this, but it is pretty obvious that Drew really just wants Jake to be there, and he feels like he's losing him. Jake leaving and making excuses probably reminds him of his parents, though.
Well, maybe that stinking club room is the only place I feel understood. You never supported my passion, and I knew you never would. Since you love to constantly talk down on the club and tell me to leave.
Well, how am I supposed to know anything about your passion when you don't tell me a damn thing anymore, huh?
It's very interesting that Drew is upset that Jake doesn't tell him anything anymore, when it was pretty obvious that from Jake's perspective, he never really told him anything, because he was afraid of being bullied the way he was in the past. The two of them had completely different perspectives on the relationship, and that's because Jake had been lying to him for a really long time by not telling him about his passion for music and continuing to bully the music club alongside Drew and the others. But of course, it was Drew's judgmental behavior that led Jake to be afraid to be honest about how he felt, and which is what got them in this mess in the first place, and that's the part that Drew fails to see.
Hey, come on, guys. Let's chill out a bit.
You guys realized it too, right? All he does is lie to our face. You tell me you'll leave, that this is all for Daisy, that you need more time to practice, that we're your real friends and not those freaks.
Ah, there it is. So Drew did know that Jake was lying to his face. Once again, I really got the feeling that Drew knew a lot more than he was letting on and was just trying to deny it in hopes that maybe that would make it not true. Like, he knew that Jake wasn't just doing the competition for Daisy, and he had a feeling that he'd stay in the club afterwards, but Drew constantly reminded him that this is what his plan was, so that he would go through with the plan, perhaps. It's almost like Drew is pretending that he thought that was Jake's intention, so that Jake would go through with it.
Not to mention you waited until now to tell me I was being cheated on by my girlfriend.
Ah yes, and we can't forget about Zoe, and the fact that Jake knew that Zoe was cheating and didn't tell Drew. I'm sure that this really hurt him when he found out, which was recently. Like, this all happened recently. So he's still pretty emotional from that as well, which might explain why he's this upset.
Drew? Henry? Liam? I'm sorry.
I was really happy when Jake was open and honest about his feelings and his intentions the entire show. I really love how he both stood up for the music club and apologized to his friends. It really felt like he didn't want to lose either of them, and I felt like he was making this known in the best way possible. Jake made a lot of mistakes, but I feel like the way that he handled himself in this episode really showed his character development. Unfortunately, Drew is not sharing my opinion.
Wow, I'm so happy for you, Jake. It's funny, I really thought they were using you. Turns out you've just been manipulating me this whole time.
I mean, Drew isn't wrong for saying that Jake was manipulating him because he was lying to his face for a really long time and he was never fully honest with him. But Drew was being manipulative as well, in the way that he was constantly trying to get Jake to say, like, we're your real friends, like, they're freaks, and all this other stuff that actually led him to snap in episode 9. The issue is that Drew isn't really aware of his own actions, which makes anybody who goes against him seem like the bad guy. Jake didn't lie out of malicious intentions, but out of fear. In the same way that Drew pressured Jake not out of malicious intentions, but out of fear. Really what I'm trying to say is Drew is completely valid for feeling hurt by realizing that Jake had been keeping secrets from him for their entire friendship. But if he had listened to where Jake was coming from, I feel like that they could have fixed things between them, but instead he was clouded by his own emotions and really wasn't looking at what he did and why Jake felt that way when he was with him.
Nice to know we were never really friends.
That's not true.
Whatever. I'm done with you. Have a nice life, freak.
Out of everything that Drew said in this episode, this singular line is really what interests me the most. Glad to know we were never really friends. He's saying that they were never friends, ever. Not just that he lost Jake now, but that they were never friends. Which, must I point out, is not true. It's pretty obvious that Jake cares a lot about Drew, and that's why he didn't quickly just leave Drew for Haley as soon as she put it up as an option. He said all those things about the club in episode 9 because he really didn't want to lose Drew and his friends. But just because this statement isn't true, that doesn't mean that Drew doesn't feel like it's true. It's obvious that he does because that's exactly what he says. Drew has been manipulated a lot, probably, by people like Zoe and maybe even other people in the past who really just want to use him for his money or whatever. And with all these past experiences, like Zoe, I can definitely see why he would think that because Jake was lying to him, that meant that he never really cared about him. While being far from the truth, I can understand Drew's perspective. Jake broke Drew's trust, and he really didn't feel like opening himself up to trust Jake again, so he just left. What Jake did obviously hurt him a lot, because he felt like he had a real and trustable friend in Jake, and it turned out that he'd been lying to him. It was probably a situation where Drew thought that Jake was different than everyone else he'd been friends with before, but it just wasn't the case. and everything else that he'd been through flashed before his mind, and he wasn't able to see Jake's side of it, and he didn't want to put up with it anymore. He was really attached to Jake, and he felt like he was losing him, and when he found out the truth, it felt like he had never had him to begin with. So, I know what you all are wondering, and I'm wondering this too. Can they fix this? Is there a possibility that Jake and Drew will ever be friends again? I don't know what Rosie's planning to do with season 2, but honestly I get the feeling that Drew won't be in it. I don't know why, I just get the feeling. And I really hope I'm wrong, but hey, I wasn't wrong about them breaking up, so... But if we put Rosie's plans aside for a minute and just think in theory in terms of the characters, I think that it's possible, but not likely. In order for them to become friends again, or more if that's what you're rooting for, first Drew would have to forgive Jake and accept his apology. Which, in order to do that, Drew would have to recognize that he was wrong, and I have a feeling that he's not going to do that, and he's just going to see himself as a victim when he played a really big role in Jake's insecurities. I think it's a lot more likely that Drew is going to see Jake hanging out with the music club and having fun, and is just going to feel jealous, and is not really going to make a logical attempt at becoming friends again. I mean, hey, there's a possibility that Liam and Henry will finally decide to do more than just stand on the sidelines and try to actually help Drew. But to be honest, he's probably just going to repeat the cycle of seeking people's attention, either to find someone who is just trying to manipulate him, or to feel like he's just not good enough for other people's love. I swear to God, someone get this man a therapist. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Sorry it took so long to come out. I've been procrastinating like crazy because that's a thing that I do. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like the video because it really helps with the algorithm, and I'll be making more videos about this soon, so make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this, and have an amazing day!